Hi, I'm Bridget Marsh, Deputy General Counsel of the LSTA, and welcome to this, our second video in the blockchain series, which is going to cover smart contracts. I'm joined again today by Joe Dewey, who's a partner of Holland Knight. Thanks for joining us, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
So in our introductory blockchain video, you reminded us that when a software programmer uses the term smart contract, it's something very different from when a lawyer thinks of a legal agreement with offer, acceptance, and consideration. Could you remind us again what the term smart contract means in the blockchain context?
When software engineers were first able to execute code in a distributed network, they referred to that as a smart contract. Because it was the ability to send a series of instructions and have those instructions execute throughout this distributed network. But again, in that context, you're only talking about snippets of code, which could be as simple as printing, hello world. Whereas we as lawyers think about contracts, as you suggested, legally binding agreements that meet the elements of offer, acceptance, consideration. Now, it's possible to implement legally binding agreements as smart contracts, but we just need to be cognizant that there are two very different definitions given to that term.
So, Joe, there are many different examples of smart contract use cases for all different industries. Maybe if we zone in on the smart contract use cases for the financial industry, could you share some of those with us?
One of the more exciting use cases, and one that's getting a lot of attention by a lot of financial institutions and others, is trade finance. With distributed ledgers, we're radically altering the way in which trade finance or global trade is accomplished, in part by taking instruments like letters of credit and bills of lading, which have been around for hundreds of years, converting those instruments to code, uploading them to distributed ledgers, which then allows for a manufacturer to send goods and a purchaser to buy those goods. And rather than having paper documents, which are cumbersome, or in the case of a letter of credit, might have to work through several correspondent banks, each of whom get paid a fee, these instruments can be self-executing. And so once the goods are delivered, the digital letter of credit releases payment to the manufacturer, and at the same time, the bill of lading is automatically delivered to the purchaser. And what's particularly interesting about this use case is it leverages some other very cutting-edge technology, such as network devices that we generally refer to as the Internet of Things, as well as artificial intelligence or analytics. For example, if you were to buy goods that might be perishable if they're not maintained within a certain temperature range, we now have the ability to put temperature sensors in the container ship, which then transmit that data to the blockchain where it's logged. And again, because distributed ledgers are immutable and tamper-proof, we have a very trustworthy record of what the temperature was at every point in that journey. And so if the temperature was to go above a level that was acceptable, the purchaser of those goods would immediately know and have a way to verify that. So companies like Walmart and many others are investing significant money in these new technologies.
So earlier, Joe, you drew a distinction between a code-based smart contract executed on the blockchain and a legal agreement executed on the blockchain. I was wondering if you could dive into that a little bit more for us.
Sure. An example of something that's more just code execution based, and while not currently implemented on distributed ledgers, will be soon, is high frequency trading, for example, where you have machines just processing buy and sell orders for securities in a very algorithmic way. An example of a legally binding contract that could be implemented on a distributed ledger would be, for example, a credit agreement, or some of the ancillary documents like a security agreement. So, for example, if you had liquid collateral for a loan, you could upload those parts of the agreement to the blockchain and program it so that upon an event of default, control of that collateral would automatically be under the secured creditor's control or dominion, as opposed to having to go to a third party to hold the collateral or otherwise resort to judicial means.
Let's turn a little bit closer to home to the legal industry. And you've mentioned that the potential for change in the legal industry is going to be radical with the blockchain. You mentioned that it could be something greater than, say, when the legal industry gave up typewriters and moved to word processors. It's a real paradigm shift. It's going to be closely linked to contract automation, and you've said that lawyers have to be more like programmers when they draft their legal agreements. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on that with us.
There's no doubt there are certain differences between writing contracts and the skills to write software, but there's also a lot of similarities, particularly when you think of our role as a lawyer in drafting contracts is to articulate the logic that's going to govern the relationship between two or more people. Well, a software developer is really writing out the logic that's going to govern what the computer or how the computer interacts with its user. And in both of those cases, as a general rule, the more specific you can be with the code and the more deterministic the code is on the one hand and your contract is on the other, the better job you've done as a lawyer. And so I think while it's not fair to expect all future lawyers to be lawyers and software engineers, I think it would be a good thing for law schools to begin to provide some training to future lawyers so that at a minimum they could interact or collaborate with software engineers and as a joint effort could work on smart contracts so that we felt very comfortable that the code that's executed will match the party's intention as it's set forth on the more traditional contract that's in human prose.
So Joe, in the past we've discussed how smart documents would fit neatly or could work with forms or templates with agreed terms. And I started thinking the LSTA has more than 100 forms on our website. Maybe if we look at the LSTA PAR Confirm as an example of a contract that could be implemented on the blockchain. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's a great question. And if you look at the examples that have been used to date
Right.
to show the benefits of smart contracts, whether it's Barclays and their ISDA swap execution, or look at the DTCC, who uses very standardized commercial paper forms. When you remove a great deal of variety
Right.
in the documents themselves, then that allows you to focus on only onboarding the code to the ledger for the specific deal aspect. And then in terms of the human prose part, you can make reference to an external document, which itself doesn't even have to be stored.
So reference the Confirm,
Exactly.
the LSTA Confirm.
Exactly. Just as they can reference an ISDA form. In the case of the LSTA, because there's such widespread adoption of the Confirm,
We'd like to consider it universal adoption.
universal, yes, that you only need to reference,
Right.
By incorporation, by reference,
Okay.
and that way you don't have to worry about onboarding, the rest of the contract. You can focus on the key terms of the the execution of the trade itself.
Excellent. Terrific, Joe. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts today on smart contracts. And thank you for joining us in this, our second video.